Welcome, everybody. My name is Cassie Price. I work at the Bonner Center for Civic Engagement, and we're very excited today to have a panel of experts who are going to talk about literacy. The title of our talk today is Building Literacy and Community, Reading and Writing in Metro Richmond Schools, PK through 12. So a lot of our students are volunteering in Metro Richmond schools, and this is a question that has come up, so we thought it would be really important to address it through a panel of experts. I'm going to introduce them now. Dr. Tammy Milby, right here, is the Director of Reading and a faculty member at the Department of Education at the University of Richmond, where she teaches both undergraduate and graduate literacy courses. She has worked in area schools, as a classroom teacher, a reading specialist, a Virginia Department of Education and Curriculum Specialist. Dr. Milby has published numerous articles on literacy and is the author of 2 books. Her latest work, Advancing Teacher Education and Curriculum Development Through Study Abroad Programs, will be available this January. Her research interests include teacher quality and professional development techniques, exemplary elementary teachers, school-based reading clinics, and the influence of studying abroad on teacher dispositions and instructional practices. Next to her, we have Jill Nogueras, and she is a secondary literacy coach in Henrico County. Ms. Nogueras is nationally board certified in adolescent and young adult English language arts. She is in her 13th year of teaching and has taught both middle and high school in a variety of settings. She serves on many of the Virginia Department of Education's SOL committees and enjoys presenting at conferences around the state where she can collaborate and work with educators from all over. Right next to her is Ms. Megan Kuhl. She has been an educator in Richmond Public Schools for the past 18 years. She began her career teaching 4th grade at Whitcomb Court Elementary School in Richmond's East End in 1998. After 5 years, she transferred to Overby Shepherd Elementary School in the North Side neighborhood of Highland Park. While teaching, she completed her master's degree in reading at Virginia Commonwealth University, and in 2010, she became one of the reading specialists at Overby Shepherd Elementary. This is her 6th year in that position. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dionne Ward. She is an educator for more than 35 years. And she is focused on closing the achievement gap and striving for high academic achievement in urban schools. She has experience at the pre-K, elementary, middle, and high school levels, as well as in adult education. So really the whole spectrum there. Dr. Ward has worked as an analyst, academician, homeschool coordinator, general and special education teacher, principal, district administrator, and consultant. Most recently, she served as the executive director of the Secondary Education and Turnaround Manager for School Improvement in Richmond Public Schools. Dr. Ward currently serves as the director of internships and assistant professor of education for educational leadership and policy studies right here at the University of Richmond. She has authored and co-authored numerous articles and documents, including the district's new teacher evaluation performance system. So please welcome our panelists, and I will let them take over from here. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to just start. I'm going to do just a brief, some opening remarks, and then we're really going to move into asking the panel some questions, and we want to leave some time at the end for some participant sharing and for you to come up with some potential solutions for our schools. But feel free, although the room is a little bit more structured, we would love for you to be more casual, so feel free to ask questions, to get up and grab pizza, or to ask us anything that you need clarified while the session is happening. So my first question to you is just, what is literacy? So think for just a minute. What do you think? When you think of literacy, what really is it? Okay, and so find somebody near you and just take a second or two to brainstorm. What do you think literacy really is?
Ability to read and write.
I think we need passionate about that. Read and write. So these are high schools, so sometimes I don't even know how he knows it. To be quite honest. Oh no, this is Henrico. Yeah. See that Verona High School. That's funny. I know. I said, wait, you know anything?
So most of us would probably define literacy as just the ability to read and write. We might add something else on, maybe comprehending or thinking about navigating technology, but we generally think of the definition as just being able to read and write. What we see is that it is about being able to read and write, but it's also about sort of being able to function in society. It's about being able to achieve your goals. Being able to develop your knowledge and potential, being able to access the world. So literacy is bigger than just reading and writing. It is about how you construct knowledge. It's about how you can think critically. It's about how you can access. It's about empowerment and being able to be an active citizen in our world. So imagine down below here that you couldn't read a street sign. You couldn't apply for a credit card or for a home loan. That you couldn't read the instructions on a job application. Or you got a note home from school and that you couldn't really access that and know what to do with that. There's lots of adults that are really struggling with that every single day. So what sort of happens if an individual is illiterate or doesn't learn to read? Sort of what does that mean? Just as far as definitions go, functional illiteracy, we would say, is when someone is reading below sort of grade 4. And just to give you some explanation, when we do literacy assessments, when we say grade 4, that's usually an end of grade level, being able to read and decode a passage, but then also being able to comprehend or understand what's there. So when we say that someone is not able to function on that 4th grade level, we really mean sort of an end of 4th grade, beginning of 5th grade level. There's also being marginally literate, which could mean that you're struggling with your literacy and maybe your reading level might be somewhere at that sort of upper elementary or middle school level. And then lower limited literacy is also a term that could be used, and that's just thinking about anything that you can't do anything above sort of that 7th grade level. We also know that individuals' literacy can be impacted by lots of other factors, like specific learning disabilities or difficulties, or if you're coming from another country and you're an English language learner and acquiring this language. So how does it impact all of us? And so just one more time with that same buddy or partner, can you brainstorm some ways people not achieving literacy like we would like might impact our nation, our economy, our world? Let's just take a second to chat about that.
Point about voting, the issues.
I know.
Would you repeat the prompts, please?
Sure. So just how
It's gonna be fun. They seem like
They don't look confident.
right. They're smiling.
And remember, Paul before
Cassie mentioned to me that we should stop the conversation at 1 to 5, so I'm trying to cover stuff that goes quickly so we can.
Okay, that's fine.
This is good. I think this is good dialogue, that interaction.
I do too.
Better than just sitting
Than just
and
listening to us.
Yeah.
I almost rather.
Okay, let's hear a few, some things that you talked about. Anybody want to share something that you talked about or thought about?
Reduced worldview.
Okay. Others?
Generational illiteracy.
Okay.
Friends that I have that are in the middle school and high school levels say that it really presents a problem so often students that can't read act out, and so there's discipline issues that then, take so much time. So the students that really want to learn have to deal with that and wait, and they're the ones that are really missing out. But so often the way the discipline is handled is like, the teacher has to then get someone to cover the class, walk them to the office, they sit for 10 minutes or back in the class, it happens all over. And it's just a constant discipline issue that's kind of robbing all the other students from learning. So
I certainly saw that as a school reading specialist. You know, I would be up in the front office and I would mostly see the kids that were in my groups and that I was working with and collaborating with teachers in the classroom. And, you know, if you're a fourth grade guy and you're really struggling with your literacy and your teacher wants you to read something out loud or participate in something and you really can't access that, it's probably, to those kids, more cool to just push a chair or say something inappropriate and get thrown out of class than for the other kids to know that maybe that you can't read, and so that we might see some behavior as a result of that. So here's just some statistics about sort of our nation, but some studies may show that as many as 50% of adults can't read a book written in an 8th grade level or above. Here's some statistics about our economy. And so just thinking about illiteracy costs to our taxpayers is estimated to cost us about $20 billion a year. So that's a really significant amount. And then my last thing that I wanted to sort of talk about a little bit is grade 3 really magic? So if you work in educational circles, you may have heard people say, it's so important that kids learn to read by the end of 3rd grade. Like 3rd grade is so significant. We keep hearing that over and over and over again. And part of that is because in the lower grades, we're really focused on teaching kids how to read. We're focusing on sort of how does reading work and how to decode and how to comprehend and how to access vocabulary words and use context clues and those kinds of things. And then once kids hit 3rd grade, the curriculum really picks up and it's about using your reading to be able to access math and science and social studies and your other subject matters. But is it really magic? What do you think? Like, why do we pick that 3rd grade level? Any ideas or guesses?
I would say probably because once you get like 3rd grade, it's kind of like the central year, like in the elementary school or like primary level, and after that, it's kind of like they're trying to get you ready for middle school, in which that's when you actually have to start like learning how to like comprehend and like analyze reading. So that's probably why they think that grade 3 you have to basically have a good grasp of it.
You know, I don't know enough about this, but I'm sure there is some developmental reasoning rationale behind it. And I worked at a Waldorf school, and there was always a critique of Waldorf methods, being that there is not, you don't even read until you go into the 3rd grade. So they're not actually even starting to teach reading till then, because students some are not ready. And it's not saying that you know, students aren't reading at home with their parents, but in the formal classroom they're not. So there is a developmental piece behind this.
So clearly the curriculum picks up, what we expect of kids may be different. But what we see from a lot of research and a lot of longitudinal studies is that when we track kids that really have struggled at the 3rd grade level and look at their long-term outcomes, what we see is that those kids are not very likely to graduate from high school, so they may drop out from school. They're more likely to end up in the prison population or commit a crime. They're more likely to not, you know, have a solid job or go into college. And so what we just see from the research is that if kids don't sort of get it by 3rd grade, then we start to see the outcomes sort of become more dismal. That doesn't mean, though, that we can't help a kid in 4th grade or 5th grade or middle school or high school. It just means we have more work to do and that we would want to be more cognizant of that. So here's just some impacts a little bit on society. You know, some states in the United States are still using reading scores and kids' ability to read by 3rd grade to look out for long-term outcomes for how many prison beds they're going to need. Also, we see that kids that are in juvie or juvenile detention lots of times have significant reading problems, and that lots of adults are struggling to just do simple tasks like be able to read a prescription drug bottle. So there's this concept in reading that was actually, it came from psychology, but it's actually pulled from the Bible. Sort of to summarize, it's from the book of Matthew, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And how it relates to reading is, maybe you're a kindergartner or a 1st grader and you're just starting to struggle a little bit, and so you're not reading as much. But then comes 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. The more books you read, the better you get at it. The better you get at it, the more vocabulary you have. The more vocabulary you have and the better you do at it, the more motivated you're going to be. And so what happens is we may see sort of at kindergarten and 1st grade sort of a little discrepancy for maybe the kids that are just starting to struggle and those that need a little bit more support, but maybe by 3rd grade, that gets a little larger, and by 5th grade, that gets a little larger, and by middle school, that gets a little larger, just because of the number of vocabulary words kids are exposed to, the amount of reading volume that happens, and then the motivation that might occur. So why should all of us become involved? So this is kind of depressing, right? Literacy impacts our community, it impacts our nation, it impacts society. We have all these kids that are struggling and all of these adults that might not be literate the way that we want them to be. What can we do to make a difference? Maybe with your partner one more time, what ideas do you have? Just think about it for just a second.
I was actually going to talk about that. You have no, I will. Yeah, describe the ways of reading support. And you know, I was thinking in terms of like I said, I don't know.
That particular question is very similar to our preschool.
She'll say, you'll have to tell her. She'll be like,
But we started together. She just didn't stick to what I did. We were also taking this together.
Thank you so much. And I stole your cat.
You're fine.
Friday the 13th.
Yes, she was my principal. Bonnie was the first one. And she was the next few years. And I mean, when I say as far as, I mean.
Okay, let's come back together. So you have lots of great ideas and lots of solutions. I was wandering around and eavesdropping, and I heard everything from let's give every baby that's born a book to let's get parents involved, let's volunteer in schools, let's try to make sure kids have access to books that they really enjoy. And so I heard lots of good solutions from you guys. But what we see from the emerging research is that reading volume matters a lot. How much you read, how many minutes a day you read really makes a significant difference. And in some studies, what the research has shown is that the kids that are sort of at an average level compared with kids that are at sort of a high or super performing area, that there's only about 15 or 20 minutes difference in the amount of minutes that they're reading. So those kids that are sort of average readers might be reading 15 or 20 minutes a day, but the kids that are really strong performers who are performing in the 90th percentile might be reading 90 minutes a day. And so just getting kids to read for 10 or 15 more minutes a day could make a significant difference. Another series of studies that's recently come out says that we can really get kids to read on things that they're passionate about, that they have interest in. If we can help them find that book, that series, and have access to that can make a huge amount of difference. And lastly, just having access to books. You know, we all sort of assume that, you know, when we say to kids, go home and read, get a book at the library, that they have books at home or that they have access to the library, but not everybody does. I worked on one project that was for kids in the city. It was sort of an urban sort of project, and one of our goals was to get sort of a home library for every family. And so we worked really hard, you know, every week or two to send these books home. And then we started finding them, like, at yard sales and consignment shops. And they were labeled because we bought them with the grant money. And so we were like, why are all the books, like, reappearing in all these places? And so finally we chatted with the parents, and, you know, it was a surprising reason. And maybe if you hadn't grown up in poverty or you hadn't had this happen to you, you wouldn't know. But books are really a place where lots of things can hide. Insects and roaches and mice will want the paper to make their nest. And so the parents said, if I have these books laying around, it will lead to more infestation of roaches. And we already have a problem with that in our project or where we're living. And so simple solution, right? We went out and got a plastic tote. We gave every kid a plastic tote to put their books in. And suddenly the kids were talking about these books and how much they were loving them and reading them. And we weren't seeing them pop up as much, and not that they never got sold or ended up at a yard sale, but sometimes, you know, we don't even see the solutions because we've grown up in sort of a more middle class or affluent sort of situation. And so we don't always see the perspective that sometimes our children or our kids might be seeing. So what we wanted to do today was to have a little panel and to let some of the people who are really in the trenches working our schools give you some insights into what they see, what their solutions might be, and then for you to join in and for us to leave not feeling sad about literacy, but maybe feeling empowered and thinking, here's the 1 or 2 things that I could do as a member of society to help our kids learn to read and write and be more successful and more functional in society. Okay, so we're going to start with some panel questions, and I'm going to block this out just so that it doesn't blind them as they're trying to answer the questions. And so we're just going to kind of be more informal or casual and just chat just a little bit. And so Jill's going to start us off with what are some challenges that our urban schools are facing related to literacy?
I feel like that's a really loaded question, and I could probably have a bajillion answers for that. But for the sake of time, I just want to touch on a couple things. Similar to what Dr. Milby has already said, a lot of studies that are coming out now and have come out recently, more than I could even name, really talk about the definite correlation between the number of books in the house and how well a student performs in their literacy studies, but that actually there's a stronger correlation between the number of books in the house than there is actually the education level of the parent. And I think that that's really important to be mindful of and to keep that in the forefront of your mind as you're kind of thinking about how you can help students, is just making sure that they have books. And it's been shown in the United States, University of Nevada had a study out recently about by having at least 500 books in the house, they don't all have to be chapter books, but having access to 500 different texts in the house can actually determine how much further along in education students will go beyond high school. And the average for that in America, in the United States, is 2.4 years. Apparently in China, that takes them 6.6 years further. So just kind of showing that the number of books is actually far more important than the level of education that a parent has. I know in my position, I speak with a lot of parents and trying to make text accessible to them. I work specifically with grades 6 through 12, and I know a lot of parents who are like, it's great that my son or daughter brings home these novels, but I don't have time to read these novels with them, so I don't know how to help them. I don't know what to do. So kind of showing them techniques and ways to make things more accessible to them. I say, hey, you also have a 5-year-old at home. You're reading children's books with your 5-year-old. Let me hook you up with some children's books that also go review the concepts that your middle or high school student are using, so that you can review with them and feel like this is a text that you can access. I think a lot of what happens is that our urban families they're really busy. They have multiple jobs. They're not around as much to have those meaningful exposures. So I think that you have to approach it as a way where you can kind of be double dipping. If you're going to be reading to your kid, you can be helping your 15-year-old at the same time that you're helping your 5-year-old. And just the lack of exposure to environmental print. No one necessarily is at home reading to them at night. Like I said, the multiple jobs kind of plays into that a lot. And then just having access to text, and for parents to feel like they have a way to help their children. I think they feel defeated, and so as a result, the condition kind of continues.
I'm going to go to the next question, but piggyback on what Jill said, because do you want to read the next
Yeah, I'll just read the next question, which is, can you describe some ways the community can support schools in Metro Richmond?
And this is, I'm piggybacking on what she's saying in terms of having books in the home. One of the things that we're doing right now in our school is we have a table that says, please take these books, build your home library. So anytime the students come in the school, they can grab a book. When parents come in the school, they can grab books. And we like to keep that table full. So book drives and donations of books are always helpful because, just getting those in the home, like you said, I guess plastic tubs would help the cause too. But that's one very simple way. But in addition, volunteering really is an important way that community members can get involved. We, through both tutoring and mentoring programs, with Cassie, we have lots of volunteers from University of Richmond who come into my school particularly, And they work in classrooms sometimes with specific teachers or with specific students. And that is helpful, but we've been trying to dig a little deeper, and even then having our volunteers trained in different literacy approaches, and so that it's not coming in and reading to a child is always helpful, but if we can dig even deeper and use our resources to actually have our volunteers trained, that's just more bang for our buck. And then mentoring too, I feel like so many of our students just need positive adult role models, and I've seen lunch buddy programs that have been successful, and then just other mentoring programs that just give the students someone to talk to and someone to support them. And the last thing I was going to say is that with community partners, a lot of the schools like mine need assistance with their PTAs, and so community partners can help our PTAs plan events that bring families in and bring families on board, which is always going to impact the kids in a positive way. We've had when I was reflecting, I was thinking about this one year that we partnered, and I don't even know if it was a church or another community partner, and we planned a Thanksgiving meal. So we had people come in and help prepare all the food, and we invited families, all of our families in, and we had this evening where we all sat in the gym at tables and had a feast together, and it was really wonderful. But my point is that bringing families in has a positive influence on the children, and that's going to impact their academic performance. So those are just some little ideas.
So our next question relates to leadership, and it's how can school leaders help classroom teachers improve literacy instruction?
And so to keep the flow, as she piggybacked on her, I'm going to piggyback on Megan. And if you'll recall, she said several key words. One, she talked about mentors. So the question is, what can school leaders do? Before I continue, let me just see who my audience are. Do we have any teachers in the audience? Teachers in a public or private school? Do we have any educational leaders? Do we have any parents? Only a couple. Do we have anybody who has nieces, nephews, or cousins? Little children.
Children.
Okay.
How many of you are volunteers?
And volunteers or mentors or tutors in schools? Okay, so that gives me a good feel, because I have actually about 11 things that I'm going to share with you what research says leaders should do. But before that, just to piggyback on what Megan said, she talked about tutors. So a good leader in a school will try to get some tutors and mentors and volunteers and community partners. A good school leader will try to have a table available, take a book. We actually have a couple tables here on campus where it says take a book. I mean, so we even do that at the university. They're not necessarily for literacy, but just to add to your library of resources, which is very good. So to piggyback on what she says, good leaders should do all of that. But prior to that, a good educational leader should have a vision of what literacy needs to look like in their school. And in order to do that, you have to know your students. You need to know the data. You need to know where children are falling on that grade spectrum. You also need to know your teachers, the caliber of teachers you have, the ones who may have been trained in reading. Most people believe that an English teacher is a reading teacher, and that is not true at all. Most English teachers have not been trained to be reading teachers. Most K-5 teachers have not been. Yet we've already heard that third grade is that magic grade where everybody should be reading. The newspaper is written pretty much 4th, 5th grade level, between 3rd and 5th grade level. But a good leader needs to know the data for their students. They need to know what their teachers are capable of doing as well. So they need to have a vision of what does literacy need to look like in my particular school. So if you're in an East End urban school, the plan that you develop may look very different from a far West End Henrico school. It's just a lot of different demographics that makes a big difference. So the literacy plan is going to look differently. And so for the sake of time, I'm kind of going to go through these 11 very quickly. And the reason I wanted to know my audience is because if you're a parent, I want you to ask yourself, have I seen that in my child's school or my niece's or nephew or cousin's school? Or if I'm a mentor or volunteer in a school, do I see any of these things? And if the answer is no, then in a nice creative way, you have to one day figure out how you're going to get with that educational leader to make sure these things happen. So I'm kind of going to go through this quickly for the sake of time. But one school leader should share effective strategies in faculty meetings. Most school leaders have a meeting, faculty meeting, at least once a month. Oftentimes it's filled with do this, do that, this is do this visitor's coming here. It's filled with things like that. But a good leader should share a strategy at least once a month that all of the teachers across content levels can do. So when you're in middle school or secondary, you're not having the reading block like in elementary school. I mean, you're in core classes. But good teachers will make sure that reading occurs and all of that, and writing, because writing is very much a part of the literacy program as well. But principals need to introduce a strategy each month in the faculty meeting. Include one strategy each month in the faculty newsletter or a newsletter that may go home. So I have I'm really old now, but I had 3 children. I still have 3, but they're all grown. But when my children were little, they did not bring home necessarily a newsletter every week. And certainly with the influx of children with other backgrounds, it certainly wasn't one that came in Spanish or French or anything like that, but we just didn't get it. And when we got one, it was a cute little picture because the kindergartners went to the pumpkin patch. It was when the PTA meeting is going to be, the next PTA meeting. It was information like that, nothing pertaining to literacy. So good leaders should make sure that something is included in the newsletter. They should also form a partnership with newspapers in education. The Richmond Times-Dispatch works very closely with all of the area schools, and it's very, very inexpensive to make sure that each class has newspapers. And so a good leader tries to ensure that that's done. Expand the classroom library so that it includes more than just the curriculum for the teachers, but the library should be extensive enough, as was mentioned earlier, to include books that the children would like to read, that are of interest to them. So if you're interested in something, you tend to read it. My husband retired as an engineer with General Electrical, and if you see some of his books, when I read them or try to read them, I'm illiterate because I have no idea, I have no clue as to what they're talking about with the wires and the circuits and all of that. Likewise, he's not as interested in the stuff I read. So it's important to find things that you're interested in reading. Another thing that principals should do is to explore options to subscribe into electronic text databases. A lot of children, particularly middle and high school, like this or the cell phone, a whole lot more than a book. And I have a high school grandchild, and I mean she's on her phone like 23 hours of the day, and she gets a lot of information. She's fortunate in that she attends a high school that allows the use of technology to access information. And so it's just very normal for her every time somebody says something that she's not familiar with to get to her phone and look it up, Google it, and read it. But it is expanding her reading and her vocabulary because she's on it frequently. So she does a little bit more than just the chats and all the negative stuff that kids tend to do. I think she does that too, though. The other thing is to purchase and implement a reading program to meet the needs of all students. Many of you may know that in schools now, students are tiered based on their reading level. So they're tier 1, 2, or 3. But you need to make sure that you have reading programs that would apply and help all children. One other thing, and then I'm going to stop here, is good principals should establish at least 2 literacy classrooms. And by that I mean if you have a teacher or teachers who are skilled in literacy and knows exactly the kinds of strategies to introduce and use in a classroom, that would be like a model classroom. And a good principal, good leader, would set up a schedule whereby the teacher who's not as skilled would be able to come and visit that, like a peer observation, visit that classroom to learn strategies. And good principals should do that anyway, whether it's about classroom management, I heard the young lady in the back say something about sometimes when children don't read well, they'll tend to act out a little bit more, which is true. But the peer observations of teachers is helpful in many ways. And literacy classrooms is just one good way where another teacher, maybe a new teacher or a teacher who's struggling, could come in and see how libraries are set up, to see how effectively teachers can integrate and use that. You teach a lesson. Here, the 3 little smart kids over here, they finished their work early, so the teacher could see what that teacher, that model teacher, is doing for those students while the other ones catch up. And so there is certainly a skill and art to teaching. Having taught for many years, I've seen many great teachers and some not so good teachers as well. But it certainly helps when teachers have someone else to kind of learn from. So I'm going to stop there because we got time.
Yeah, so our next question just focuses on why is early intervention important? So why should we try to jump in with those younger students?
It's so very important. What can I say? I was reading an article the other day by a leading reading researcher, Dr. Richard Allington, and he was saying that this is students across the country, 1/3 of kindergartners come in knowing their letters and most consonant sounds. Then 1/3 come in knowing to recognize letters, and then 1/3 come in not knowing any of the letters, can't identify letters. And then the same goes for then 4th grade students. We have essentially 1/3 who are above, 1/3 who are on grade level, and 1/3 who are below. And this is kind of a direct correlation and prediction of reading success by 4th grade. Unfortunately, in urban schools, we're not dealing with 1/3 of the students coming in. We're dealing with more like 2/3. I was looking at our kindergarten data, and it shows that 2/3, so we have 3 classes. So we have 2 whole classes of kids who are starting at a very distinct disadvantage. And we have 1/3 of the kids who are on the right track. We also have 1 pre-K or VPI class at our school. So had all those students had the opportunity to attend VPI, we might be in a different situation. To me, it is just so critical. I see it every day that these students are at a disadvantage, and it takes more time, more effort, more intervention to catch them up. In my opinion, the early intervention, the 4-year-old programs, the VPIs, the Head Starts should essentially be required. It's just, not fair to those students to start off at such a disadvantage. It makes a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So you bring up the point that Head Start and those earlier on programs should be required. But the language that currently exists with education policy, is that such where education is not a right? Or the Supreme Court blatantly stated that you don't have a right to education. How can we change that? Or how can we change that language?
You don't have a right. Anybody who's just in attendance want to take that on?
What was the question?
So the current language of education policy is that you don't have a right to education. But we know that programs like Head Start are very helpful in the long run. How can we change the language of education policy given political climate?
I just wanted to think about it more. I don't have an answer.
a lot of our funding that goes into schools, our federal dollars, goes into programs for kids that are at have a disadvantage socioeconomic status wise. So we have programs like Head Start or Title I that look at free and reduced lunch and families' income, and then determine that maybe some more resources are needed. But clearly those aren't the only schools or the only places where kids need intervention or need support. And so I think as educators, we would love to see everybody getting high quality preschool or language experiences, going to the library, reading books, families engaging and interacting together as well.
But I think further, just to expand on your question, the magic answer is money, funding. If you can imagine every child, let's just take U.S., in the United States, every child having access to those types of programs requires a place for them to meet. It requires books and other materials because they're little, 3 and 4-year-olds. Then you need also manipulative so they can move the A around and capital A from little a, and so you need that, and then you need people. And so all of that costs money, and I think, I know that we're, in our nation, we don't have the kind of money available to support educating every child at that age. I mean, the law clearly says that once students become of school age, they're required by law.
Right.
And so monies have been appropriated for that, but preschool, it's a different story. Yeah, it's a different story. But I agree that it would be. It would be nice. It would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the presidential election also coming in the next year, it'll be interesting to see how our main candidates, feel about early childhood as well as funding more money towards education.
So just in regard to funding, a lot of you may know him, but I spoke with Ben Campbell. He's active in the Armstrong High School, and he told me how something to go on funding is that to set a Title I school equal to some other more prosperous high schools, you need to provide 150 to 200% of the funds you would give to a normal middle class school, and I think that's something that I'm sure isn't happening, and yeah, and you can really see it. And this is just kind of a plug for, I never talk about literacy, but a plug for math is that with the SOL, the kids are given their calculator. So what I find in the classroom is that the issues with math are blanketed over by handing the kids a calculator, and they don't know really what these mean, what the processes mean, and it's because the teachers want to cover them, and this isn't against the teachers, it's, they're trying to pass this test, so a loophole in it is giving the kids a calculator. So, sorry.
Well, we want our kids to have strategies and know how to use resources, and so as teachers, we want to focus on not just necessarily taking the resources away, but giving kids the right strategies to know how to use that resource effectively, which leads right to our next question, which is for secondary teachers working in content areas, what can they do to promote literacy?
And I'm going to take a minute and include English teachers as secondary content area teachers, especially because once you hit late middle and definitely high school, there are no such thing as reading classes anymore, unless you're in a very severe situation. And I would argue, as a former high school English teacher myself, I did not have the knowledge to help students who got to middle and high school with their reading deficiencies and had to go back to school myself for a master's to know how to help them. As an English major, you don't get that. You learn how to analyze the literature once you know how to read it. But if they can't read it, it doesn't matter if you can find the extended metaphor. So I'm going to include English teachers when I talk about this. But what I really want to talk about, someone once explained it to me this way, and it's always stuck with me. When students attend middle and high school and they're switching 7 periods, they have 7 different teachers, you kind of almost have to think of it like they have a passport and they're traveling to 7 different countries during their school day. And they're dealing with 7 different personalities and 7 different contents. And if you think about the fact that in their journey, they're going to places where they're not fluent in the language that the teacher is using and speaking, then they're not comprehending what's going on. And as a secondary person myself, I will also say that when you go to school and you become a teacher, generally speaking, you were probably a good independent reader yourself. You don't think about what you have to do and the strategies that you're using when you are reading because it came naturally to you. You don't stop and think that a student might not naturally visualize when you're reading something. They might not naturally make connections. And if you add on to, and that's me as an English teacher, never mind a math or a science teacher who went to school to really learn their content. So to think about what that does for a student when they're sitting in your classroom, because you certainly know what you are doing, and you have all the strategies that you're using in your head that are working for you, but the best thing you can do as a content area teacher is to really stop, slow down, and think out loud about what you are doing to process through the information that you are sharing to make that visible for the students. That's like the number one thing they can do is to make that learning visible. How did I get from here to here? And it comes so naturally to you, you just do it automatically. They do not. This is like learning a new language. I would show them that I'm a reader outside of whatever it is I'm teaching. And I would also show them how to do close reading and how to deal with the vocabulary of whatever content area that is. And these are just all things. It's also important to show, even from a middle school, they go to reading class and they'll learn strategies for how to attack a text. But then they'll go to science and they'll read a textbook and not understand that the strategies they learned over here could help them over here. So as content area teachers, we really need to make that visible, and I think that goes with what Dr. Ward was saying about faculty level strategies, teaching all teachers to use consistent strategies so that the students are able to access the material. But I really do, I think it really comes from making your own learning, even as from the teacher perspective, visible to the students so that they can access the material and kind of get their passport stamped successfully as they're going through.
All right. So what we're going to do, we have one last question, and so I'm going to ask Dr. Ward. She had the last question about increasing parental involvement and engagement to maybe give us one tip since we're running behind on time, because we want to make sure there's time for you to chat and talk and ask questions of the panel, and we don't want to take up all of the time. So if you could give us one tip, and then we'll move on.
I'm going to do one tip and put two things in the one tip. One is to build good relationships with parents. Parents are not going to come to school often, period. Only elementary people sometimes. So we need to do a better job building relationships so that parents feel comfortable. Secondly is to encourage more literacy programs for parents. Truly, the literature says and research says that students perform pretty much as well as the mother. That's just so if the mother only has a third grade education, that says a lot to what's going to happen with the children. So building relationships and developing programs where parents understand how to help at home.
And so lastly, we just wanted to see what questions you had for the panel and maybe have some time for small group discussion. And so how would we like to proceed? We can do them whole group, or we can divide into teams, and I can send panel members to you. So
we only have a couple minutes.
Yeah.
We end at 25.
Yeah. Okay. A couple people have questions. Want to start back here? Okay. Go ahead.
So my question was, do you see sometimes where often some students who aren't necessarily not literate, but they're just not interested in showing that they're literate? Because being I've volunteered, I find that there are a lot of kids who they're labeled as they can't read when actually they can, but it's more so that they're just not interested in it. Is that something you see often?
We do. Do you want to talk about that at the secondary level? Or can we take that on?
Yeah, the buzzword for that would be the students aren't engaged. That's kind of what we see a lot of, especially at the secondary level. There are a lot of students, all those funky things that happen in middle school, and your body's changing and you don't know who your friends are, and all of that comes into play. And a lot of students don't necessarily want to put themselves out there as being smart in the classroom, so they will sit there and kind of be passive bystanders when they are retaining and understanding the information, but they're certainly not going to show that off. It might not be cool to their new friend in the class if they're doing that. But yes, it does happen, and hopefully I would hope that teachers are using student conferences and small groups to kind of find that information out if a student doesn't want to share in whole group.
It seems so often that students are passed even when they can't read, like this third grade reading level, and it just keeps making the problem worse and worse. A solution seems to me that if you looked at what it costs, like with the prison inmates that can't read, and just what it costs society later on in life, and even after that third grade level, if they don't pass, that they could spend a summer in summer school between third and fourth grade where it's a real focus and concentration on reading. But my main question is, in my generation it was phonics, and then my children's generation it was sight reading. Now it's kind of a mix. Have you all done research? I mean, as far as the actual techniques of teaching reading, what seems to be the most effective?
Yeah, so what we see now that's recommended that the research seems to show is more of a balanced approach. So taking little bits and pieces of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluence, vocabulary comprehension, having sort of an integrated or more synthesized sort of approach. But getting back to your question about third grade, what we've seen is that a lot of people have said, well, why don't we just retain kids if they don't learn to read? And what the research has shown is that they'll be retained, but not if nothing changes or nothing different happens, that then they tend to have that same problem in fourth grade and fifth grade, and now they're 14 or 15 and they're in elementary school and they're much, much older. And so we've got to do something different to intervene early, to help them with good strategies and to make them be successful. Sometimes retention might not always be the right answer. Sometimes kids just do benefit from another year, and so that's why it would be important for that educational team to really take a close look. One last question here, maybe?
I just wanted to, I guess, make a comment. I'm really concerned about school facilities these days in terms of this push for large industrial-sized high schools. It seems like that's running counter to a lot of the things you're all talking about as far as being able to intervene and find out what the students are doing. And I just look at what's happening to the schools in RPS that are working and they're being leveled, and there's reasons for that. But the problem is, by trying to push them into this larger models, I think we're going to lose a lot of the teacher-student interaction that we need to counter literacy models.
And they're doing it in elementary schools too. So when they close a building, they'll close a couple and build one much larger school that will accommodate, what used to be our neighborhood school. And it all boils down to money, because, you've probably read about my school.
Right.
Paper.
But just to add to that, the state has a formula. School systems follow the formula. So, for example, at secondary, it's about 1 per 20, one teacher for 20. So it doesn't matter whether it's 2,000 students in the school or 600, the ratio is still supposed to be 1 to 20. But what, in terms of money, and you're right, I think the larger the building, the less apt students have that cohesiveness of family and that the smaller settings bring. So I would agree with you. But in terms of personnel, the larger building should have the same number of personnel per pupil. And in terms of money, it's just easier to have a couple of secretaries, a couple of principals, the teachers, have the big science lab, the reading lab, the computer lab, the this, that, and the other, which you can't have in the smaller schools.
So we have Colleen Conley who's going to come forward and make a couple of announcements. But while she's walking forward, we don't want to leave without you having one way that you think maybe you could take action. So with a partner beside you, what's one thing you could do to address literacy in the Metro Richmond schools? Just one small thing you could do before you leave. And the panel will all be around, so if you have individual questions we didn't get a chance to answer, or you have insights, we would love to chat with you after the session is over.
Yes, and let's give everyone a hand. That was wonderful. Thank you.